Hello everyone, I'm Anna Fisher, and in my last video I mentioned that I was going to be doing two videos, one right after another. So for you it was last week, for me it was 10 minutes ago. So last week we talked about how history rhymes and why it rhymes and the institutional nature of people's behavior and how institutions shape that behavior. And this week we're going to talk about something that is the flip side of that, and how history, as the saying goes, doesn't repeat, but it does rhyme. History doesn't repeat. And sometimes looking at the past and spotting historical parallels and examining those historical parallels can distort our view of history and disguise the ways in which the two situations are actually quite different. I should have ironed this dress. I didn't iron this dress. And now I'm paying for it. So what do I mean by historical parallels that disguise the ways in which situations are different? Well, I have two examples. And the first is the same example we've been using all along, which is the striking parallel of Henry VII and Thomas Becket, and Henry VIII and Thomas More, and the conflict between the British monarchy and the Catholic Church, and the prerogatives of the Catholic Church versus the powers of monarchy. There are striking parallels there, and in both cases you ended up with a Catholic martyr and a king who did not get what they wanted out of the Catholic Church, and in one case actually had to do penance, and then still didn't get what he wanted. And he got some nice things out of it. Henry II was able to basically co-opt Thomas Becket as his patron saint, as his personal saint, which is hilarious because like really you martyred him and then now you get to claim him as your personal saint? Do you have no sense of irony? The answer is, of course, he was fully aware of the irony. Henry II was a smart man. But, yeah, the medieval Catholic Church. Am I right? Okay. And in the other case, he actually had to break with the Catholic Church and start his own church because he could not get what he wanted out of the Catholic Church. So you do have, some very striking parallels. But you also have to acknowledge that these are not perfect correlations. And indeed, you might side with the king in one situation and the church in another, depending on what exactly they were fighting over. Henry VIII was a pissy little man baby who wanted a divorce so that he could have a male heir, when he had a perfectly good daughter there that he could. There were a number of things that he could have done that aren't just, put his daughter in power. In fact, one of the things that was considered at the time was, and the church was on board with this one, was giving a dispensation for his illegitimate son to marry his daughter, to marry Mary, which okay. I'm siding with Henry on this is a terrible idea, but and that he should just not go there. That maybe that was the wrong move, but that was he had other possibilities. He could have, and indeed he was training Mary for the throne previous to this, until he decided he'd rather try for a male heir. There were he had options, and he chose the one that was the most dramatic and also through the most of his weight around, which is very Henry VIII. So you have that situation, and then you have Henry II. And Henry II wanted to prosecute criminus clerks. And criminus clerks refers to people who were part of the church institution, who were part of the church hierarchy, who were priests, monks, bishops, down to clerks, who were people who were basically laymen but were under the church protection. People who were clerical. That's where this word comes from. members of the clerical hierarchy who committed crimes. He wanted to be able to prosecute them under civil law instead of under church law, which is what they were being prosecuted under previously, which was notoriously lenient. Indeed, if you could recite a few verses in Latin from the Bible, you might be able to get yourself into the church court and get your life spared. And a better parallel to this might actually be the sexual abuse scandal in the church, and how priests would go to the church and do confession and then be judged by the church hierarchy. And then, they'd never deal with the civil authorities. They would just be moved to a new parish and no one would ever know. And this is, of course, obstruction of justice. And, of course, the civil authorities in the various places where this happened tried very, very hard to put an end to this and prosecute these men under civil law. Now, imagine if they didn't have the legal power to do that. Imagine if they were told by the church, actually, you don't have the legal authority to prosecute these people. Not only will we not, give you the evidence you need, not only we're going to throw every roadblock blocking your way, but you actually don't have the power to do this. That's what Henry VIII was hearing. And he didn't like that very much. As a king, he was a major legal reformer, and he worked on a number of fronts to create a single civil law in his country for everyone. And the fact that the church was able to try its people in its own court and not turn them over to civil authority was a major fly in his ointment. And he, like all state powers, wanted to be able to have authority over the laws in his land. And you really can't blame him. He wanted to be able to maintain a single legal system in the country in which he ruled. He had that institutional desire to establish that power, but wanting that power, he wanted it for totally understandable reasons. He wanted it not just because he was on a power trip, but because he really wanted to reform his country's legal system. And he created this single law for everyone on multiple fronts, and this was something that was made him extremely irritated, and you can't really blame him for trying to impose this. So you have these very different situations between somebody whose interests as a monarch flared up over something incredibly understandable and valid and worthwhile, and something that we as modern people would have a lot of sympathy with, versus somebody whose somebody whose conflict with the church was over something as stupid and useless and petty as could be. I'm sorry, I have no sympathy for Henry VIII ever, so I know that biases me, but still, you had very, very different circumstances, and the striking parallels between the two can serve to disguise those differences. And the other situation that I want to talk about is something that is much more modern, and that is the anti-vaxxers and the history of anti-vaccination versus the people who were against inoculation in the New World epidemics of smallpox in the 18th century, or the 17th and 18th century. Because modern anti-vaxxers, who believe a lot of conspiratorial nonsense about the danger of vaccines, and who are effectively buying into misinformation and scaremongering to endanger themselves and their community by reducing herd immunity for extremely dangerous diseases such as not smallpox, we're going to talk about smallpox, measles and whooping cough and polio, and this is very reckless and a really damaging thing in our society, that people are using their bodily autonomy to neglect their community this way. Side note, I actually caught whooping cough, and it was a very scary experience because at the time I had a baby niece and I was very angry and upset that I couldn't spend any time with her because she hadn't been vaccinated yet, and I wouldn't have been in this position if the children in the community that I was in had been receiving their vaccinations as they should be. Like, their parents were neglecting their vaccinations for no good reason, and because of this, I caught an entirely preventable disease, and was put in danger as a person with autoimmune diseases, and as the aunt of a baby who, if I had been into contact with her before I knew what I had, that could have killed her. I'm sorry. I am extremely angry that this is a thing. But I don't let that knowledge of our modern situation interfere with my understanding of the past situation, the situation in the early days of our country during the colonial period and into the Revolutionary War. Inoculation was a process by which people were given a mild case of smallpox. And inoculation, or variolation, could actually give you full-blown smallpox. People did get full-blown smallpox, and about 2% of people who were variolated or inoculated died. And that's no joke. I mean, that is the death rate for COVID, and you can see how seriously we should be taking that. And that's just from inoculation. If you were not inoculated, you, depending on your ethnicity, you could have, anywhere from a third to much, much more severe, 2/3, 3/4 upwards. Some estimates say for Native Americans it was 90%. I mean, it was a very lethal disease. And so a lot of people did choose to be inoculated. And this was especially the case in the New World, where people didn't have these smallpox epidemics every few years that would basically have all the children get smallpox and either die or come out of it immune. Yes, this is part of the reason why childhood mortality was so incredibly high. But smallpox was a terrifying disease, and people were terrified of it. So why was there controversy over inoculating people? Well, there was the sort of usual stuff. There's the stuff that, we still have, it's against God's plan. But you also had the very serious concerns related to money and class and the transmissibility of smallpox. Inoculation was expensive, and doctors would only do it under certain circumstances and for certain people, and it was very expensive, a very expensive treatment. They tended to give people a lot of pre-treatments that we now know were not actually helpful, and in fact, in some ways, were actually very dangerous and bad. But it was expensive, and so only the wealthy were usually able to access it. Except for certain charitable functions, only the wealthy were able to access this. And then to add to that, you could catch full-blown smallpox from somebody who had been inoculated with smallpox. They got a mild smallpox infection, but they could transmit full-blown smallpox. And they had to be quarantined. But you see, the thing was, most of them weren't. Nobody was mandating that they be quarantined. So if you didn't have a smallpox epidemic yet in your community and they started doing inoculation in your community, you could suddenly get a smallpox epidemic because these people were walking around with, very mild smallpox symptoms. They didn't necessarily stay indoors the whole time. They could go walking around the neighborhood and do their shopping while a little bit sick, but fully able to transmit smallpox to everyone around them. And this was serious stuff. This could kill you. This could kill you easily. A third of people who got it died. More than a third of people who got it died. This could kill your children. This could kill your babies. I can totally understand why they wouldn't want doctors to be inoculating people in their community if they didn't have any protection against smallpox. You know, this is totally understandable, especially given the class element, given the fact that people who in the lower classes couldn't protect themselves from this disease, and the wealthy were doing this entirely irresponsible, cruel, negligent, horrible act of walking around able to transmit full-blown smallpox to everyone in their community and not giving a flying you know what, not willing to see any sort of, not having any moral qualms with this. And yes, people did know about the transmissibility of smallpox. They didn't necessarily have, they didn't have germ theory, they didn't understand that, but they did absolutely know that smallpox was transmissible, that you should be quarantined, and that you could pass, and that you could pass full-blown smallpox after your inoculation. And one of the people who knew this and went abroad on the street anyway is, you know, Abigail Adams. I mean, it was so common for the wealthy to just completely disregard public safety in this way. And you really can't blame the lower classes for being horrified and pissed and not wanting this to happen in their community. I sure as hell would be in that position, because this could kill them. It is sort of the reverse of the modern situation, where the irresponsible thing was to get inoculated and then not quarantine yourself. You know, that was the irresponsible thing to do. And yet, it, you know, with our modern eyes, it's easy to look at people who were upset about inoculations in their community and go, oh yeah, anti-vaxxers. But it was a completely different situation. So you can see how a historical parallel can blind you to the specifics of a situation. And sometimes when you're looking at a historical parallel, what's even more illustrative than the parallel itself is how the two situations might differ. So what does this mean for writers? Well, it means that if you do have a strong historical parallel, and you do have people in your own in the time you're writing who are very aware of this historical parallel, maybe you should have ways that maybe the characters aren't necessarily thinking about that, but maybe you should have ways in which those parallels don't perfectly align. Ways in which the situations were actually significantly different in some important way. And it also means that you should remember that the first part of that saying, it's not just that history rhymes, it's that history doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme. So consider the ways in which history might be rhyming, but definitely not repeating. Oh, I was going to turn off the video. That was stupid. Anyway, I'm Anna Fisher. It was lovely to talk to you today. I hope you have had a wonderful day so far, and if it hasn't been wonderful so far, I hope it gets better soon. Social media links are in the description below. If you liked this video, please consider giving it a like or subscribing to my channel, or even leaving me a comment. All of them would really, really help me with the YouTube algorithm as I am trying to grow my channel. Anyway, thank you for watching, and bye-bye for now.